against that flow of funds in order to build infrastructure. So the city developed a wholly owned subsidiary. We call it the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. The Calgary Municipal Land Corporation gets the money from the TIF, the tax increment financing, which we now call the Community Revitalization Levy. You know, bureaucrats, if one three-letter abbreviation is not good enough, make another one. So the CRL now flows in. There's not much money coming in from the CRL, but we were able to borrow against it. So we actually borrowed upwards of $200 million, which is a huge amount of money for any municipal government. But we were able to use that money to execute building the infrastructure, parks, pathways, raising the streets above the floodplain, new streetscapes, preparing the land for redevelopment and selling off to private developers. All the revenue from the taxes that comes from the new developments goes to pay off the original loan. This revitalization levy was the first of its kind in Canada. It was born out of desperation, frankly, in order to get something moving, but it demonstrated a real willingness to innovate, to be able to try something new for the community. So what has actually happened? Well, the land is almost completely sold. The folks who are sponsoring my speech today, Fram, a good Toronto company, are in fact one of the major landowners, and they're building something unbelievably beautiful there, right guys? Unbelievably beautiful? Which is going to change that community. Forever. CMLC, the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation, has done something remarkable in the East Village in a short period of time. They've turned a neighborhood where most Calgarians would not dream of stepping foot into what is going to be an incredibly highly desirable community, which will be a jewel for our city and indeed for our nation. I'm excited to say that we have a world-class national cultural institution, the National Music Center, moving in to the East Village, and City Council just a couple of months ago chose the East Village as the site for our new downtown library. These kinds of cultural and civic institutions will anchor the new neighborhood. It won't just be valleys of beautiful as they are very expensive condos. Right? We're going to make sure that it's mixed use planned from the ground up. So I think that when we look at Mississauga and we look at plans for Sheridan College, the campus downtown, Celebration Square, and the plans for the waterfront, that this is really what we're talking about, using public investment as the cornerstone in order to spur future development. This is, I believe, a good and new approach to city building. Using the Community Revitalization Levy in that way was a funded, focused, multidisciplinary way of moving forward and building a great urban community. Now, it's true the East Village is very special. It's geographically isolated. We were able to do some interesting work with it. The boundaries of the tax increment financing district were big enough that they actually included some real property tax generation. But the idea here is the important one. The idea that if we actually put our heads to it and use some innovation, we can actually get some stuff done. If we empower people who want to make change, give them the tools, then we can do things differently. That means empowering not only our elected leaders, but also giving the mandate to civil servants within our municipalities to get work done. That second bit is actually extremely important. You know, I was speaking just last week at a 40th anniversary event for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And we were extolling the importance of entrepreneurship. And one of the points that I made to those folks was that if we value entrepreneurship in the private sector, we must also value entrepreneurship in the public sector. We must also value civil servants who are willing to be innovative, who are willing to take risks, who are willing to make change. That sounds good, right, coming from a politician. But there's a very real impact of that. And that is, as the public, we have to be forgiving of our civil servants when they make mistakes. Because if we want them to be innovative, if we want them to be creative, if we want them to take risks, it means sometimes they're going to fail. Sometimes they're going to screw it up. And we as political leaders need to not throw them under the bus when that happens, as tempting as it is. And the community needs to be able to be forgiving of that because we're trying to build a better community together. That is a very interesting lesson. Because when I go back to my first question about why aren't we building the communities we want, what we find is, at least in my community, is that for whatever reason, we've created a remarkably risk-averse culture within our city. You know, bureaucrats want you to fill out a form in quadruplicate to make sure that you jump through every single hoop, because God forbid something goes wrong, you can't blame them. So we become slaves to the process instead of slaves to the success of our citizens. But in order to change that, it means sometimes we're going to make mistakes. There's a great example in Calgary right this minute. Very innovative folks in the transportation department, looking at our long-term cycling plan, realized that a particular road into downtown has always been slated for 15 years to have a dedicated on-street cycle lane, which are not very common in Calgary yet. That particular road happened to be being repaved this autumn. And so the innovative civil servant thought, hey, since it's being repaved anyway, we have to repave the line markings anyway. So for a total cost of $0, I can create a new dedicated bike lane into downtown. That's the kind of thinking we should really be applauding. There was one small problem. We didn't tell anybody. So people arrived on Monday morning, the cyclists didn't know what to do, the cars didn't know what to do, and a lane of traffic was suddenly gone. So not telling anyone what you're going to do may be a little bit too innovative. But the point of the story is that I can say that, right? We've managed to create a culture in a year where the mayor can say that and people aren't terrified. You know, where we as a city can say, well, we made a mistake. Let's see what we can do about it. Let's track the data. Let's move on as best we can. And the bike lane's still there. We're still measuring the traffic impacts. We have a YouTube video showing people how to use the bike box, because we've never had a bike box in Calgary before. And at the end of the winter, well, we should probably wait until the spring when people are biking again. But sometime next year, we'll look at all the data and we'll determine how to move forward. Do we need to change it? Do we need to improve it? Do we need to get rid of it? And all of those options will be on the table, and we'll make the decision based upon the data that we have. The third big area is the one that you've been hearing about all evening, and that really is civic engagement. It really is about bringing people into conversations about their community. As you heard, voter turnout in Calgary a year ago was at a record. It was the highest voter turnout since 1977. When I asked the city clerk about that, they told me they only started measuring it that way in 1977. So I argue that it's the highest in history. Stats, right? Interestingly, I don't know what it was here in Mississauga. I should have asked. But interestingly, our voter turnout in Calgary was a shade lower than the voter turnout in Toronto. We were 54%, they were 55%. But I think that the reason I raise that is because people always ask me, how do you overcome voter apathy? How do you overcome citizen apathy? And my argument is simply this, is that I don't believe there is such a thing. I spend a lot of my time talking to regular, everyday people. And I tell you, I have never met anyone who actually doesn't care. I've never met anyone who doesn't care about the future of their community, or their family, or their neighborhood, or their city. The problem we have is that for too many people, they don't see a relationship between their own hopes and dreams and fears and challenges for the future and all of those institutions, government, big business, nonprofits, that theoretically should be helping them achieve those dreams, that theoretically should be helping them improve their communities. That's the problem. It's not that people don't care, it's that that connection is broken. It's a form of disempowerment, really. And the question is, how do we build that back? You know, I'm not going to talk too much about this. You can ask him questions if you want, but I think the Occupy movement that we're seeing right now is a very interesting example of this. You know, I've been critical of the name of the movement. You know, Occupy Wall Street, I kind of understand what that's about. But when we start saying Occupy with the name of a community, Occupy Calgary, Occupy Edmonton, Occupy Vancouver, I say to myself, well, it's your community. You live there. Why do you feel the need to occupy a place that you live? If you already live there, why shouldn't you be working in the community to make that community better? And the answer that I've received from a lot of the young people in that movement has really simply been because we don't have any faith in the community.